There's a report that's come out of a study, the Riken Centre in Japan, concluding about the effectiveness, because we have a choice at the moment. You can wear a face mask, which comes over your mouth, or you can wear the visor. And the effectiveness of the visor from preventing droplets from spreading seems like they're suggesting they're not as effective as originally thought.
Yeah, so it's a study that was published in Japan from the Riken Centre. They looked at the efficacy of face shields and found that they weren't quite as good as wearing a mask, which I think is probably intuitive, because the visor might stop big droplets being projected forward from your mouth and nose, but it doesn't stop a downward movement of smaller aerosol droplets, as a mask might be better at doing. So I think it's probably in tune with what we probably would imagine. But it's the first bit of work that's been published that suggests that. So you could say wear both, but I think it's very uncomfortable wearing a mask for a long period of time. Hence, people tried to wear the shields. But I think if it's less effective, we might have to think about using
I mean,
masks.
one of the things that I've found, though, if you're going out and about, or you're in a restaurant or in a bar, the shield's great because you can actually see the person's mouth move.
Yeah.
And I've been in restaurants, been lucky enough to go where they've had a face mask on. It's been really difficult over the hubbub within the restaurant to hear. So that's why they were particularly appropriate for that environment.
Yeah, and a lot of people with restricted hearing, with hearing loss, have been complaining that they're unable to pick up cues from lip reading because the sound is muffled, and there are problems wearing masks. But I mean, there are problems wearing masks, but the visor can help with that, with clarity there. But if they're not as effective, we just need to make sure that COVID-19 isn't being transmitted. So if masks are more effective, then they're obviously better than face shields. But this is only one study that's been published. We probably need to look at it further.
We talked a lot yesterday morning, didn't we? You were one of the first to download it. You and I were getting in there on the tracing app. A lot of issues emerged, as it did on the show yesterday, but throughout the day, with problems with people downloading, older phones having issues. Do you feel this is teething troubles, or do you think there is an issue?
Well, it's pretty complex technology, and yes, Android devices that were made before 2017 won't be able to pick up this app, apparently, and smartphones before 2015. So it depends what kind of smartphone you have, what kind of phone you have. It depends on how it's used. I think that the privacy issues have been largely ironed out. A lot of people are worried about their data being used, but your ID code is changed every day. And I think that a lot of work has been put into protecting your identity. If you test positive and other people are notified, nobody knows who's tested positive. So no one can point the finger at you as being to blame for them having to self-isolate. But, you know, I think anything that helps the test and trace system has to be welcomed. We do need to know who needs to self-isolate, because that protects them and it protects other people too.
There were some headlines made yesterday by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, when he was asked whether students would be allowed to return from university at Christmas, and he suggested that he wouldn't want to make them stay there, but that could end up being the case, depending on how the pandemic goes towards Christmas. And then there was a response in Scotland where students, as we know, there's a number that are already having to self-isolate, but they were being told that actually they shouldn't be going home at all right now. Bit of an outcry over this, Hilary, regarding whether students would have gone in the first place if they thought that they couldn't come home if they needed to.
Well, we can look at the figures, and the figures are quite alarming. Large numbers of students have tested positive, many hundreds are having to self-isolate. And if they go home, that is spreading potentially the COVID-19 virus to other households. Even your mum and dad is another household if you're a student living in digs or in student accommodation right now. So if we're going to get a handle on this, we have to be pretty strict and pretty disciplined. If you go home to mum and dad, you're potentially taking the virus home to them, and I think that's the way people have to think.
But there are real concerns for the students, though, Hilary, with the mental health of those students. Some of them having to isolate now on their own in digs if they're in halls of residence, not even with other students around them as well, and the fact that they can't come back and seeing their families. The vast majority of our viewers getting in touch with us today saying there's absolutely no way that my children won't be coming home for Christmas, or actually will stop them going to university in the first place, which is the last thing that we want.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance of mental health, and it's a balance of the need to go out into the real world and become a mature student and mix with other people. But mixing right now is not a great idea. If you adopt the principle that universities are there to learn and to study, there's no reason you can't do that in a quite lonely way for the time being. We're talking about a temporary period. The partying can come back later, but right now it's not a good time to party and to mix with other people, and we just have to accept that. There's no way around it.
Yeah, we are talking about that later on, aren't we? We've got a big debate on whether youngsters should stay. I think one of the hard things is it's going to almost force the kind of parent generation to make a choice between whether they see their kids or whether they see their parents. It's almost like a choice between grandparents and grandchildren, isn't it? It's going to be really tough even if they do come home. Very tricky.